Before we begin the episode, I would like to thank our sponsor, Chin Up Goggles, the new generation of vision training. Its simplistic design eliminates downward vision, improving a player's spatial awareness, anticipation, skill acquisition and execution. The findings have been supported by scientific research in CIT, now MTU. Be sure to visit chinupgoggles.com for more. Welcome back to the Sideline Live podcast. You can follow us over on Twitter and Instagram at the Sideline Live. We'd love to hear from you. On episode 87, I'm delighted to be joined by St.Judes Senior Camogie Manager and Dublin Camogie coach Donie Fox. Donie is a chartered physiotherapist and runs his own clinic where he works with elite level athletes, including Olympians like Nadia, Irish soccer internationals and so much more. I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with Donie, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hi Donie, thanks a million for joining me on the podcast.
No problem, Maura. I've been waiting a long time for this to kind of cross paths, so it's good to get it done.
Brilliant. Before we get into everything, would you mind giving sort of an elevator pitch to those who might not know who you are?
Yeah, so I am a physio by trade, involved in a lot of kind of athletic development coaching, into some sports coaching, and trying to kind of bring all of those three together to create a kind of a performance model. Currently coaching the St. Judes Senior Camogie team for the last 5 seasons, and I'm involved as a technical coach with Dublin Camogie.
Very good. Your playing career, how has that shaped your coaching career and your coaching style, do you think?
Quite a lot, and like some very positive experiences at club level, and then for one reason or another, some reasonably negative experience at intercounty level. Some have been down to just wasn't good enough, but the management of the managers to me and communicating that fact, I kind of learned a lot from, and even from the kind of developing the points that weren't so good. But I suppose looking back to my playing career with my club at home, first and foremost, I don't know if you've ever heard of Paul Kilgannon. He's a coach educator. Paul coached me since I was about 13.
Oh, okay.
All the way through to a senior player, and a lot of my coaching style would come from him, which is useful because it's come through that everybody sees Paul now as a kind of a standard for coaching kids primarily, but in his day-to-day coaching, he's with some of the best hurling teams around. So that would have framed it a lot for me. And then been playing with Galway when I was younger, as a real kind of just a kid getting thrown in the deep end, deer in headlights type thing. Learned a lot from that experience on the step up required. And then I suppose looking at the coaching side now, it's when I see some of the girls or guys trying to make the step from club to intercounty, it's having that little bit of empathy for how challenging it is, speed of it, the physicality of it, the time demands, all that kind of stuff. And then later in my career, when I went as a foray into the Dublin senior hurling setup, how hard it is to manage your time when you're trying to work full time. Maybe it is becoming a student's game or a teacher's game or something like that. But yeah, it all gave me kind of insights into the experience of the player. And being able to have that little bit of empathy with the player when they're going through the process, you know.
Mm-hmm. I actually have Paul's book on my to-read list. It's on the shelf behind me. But out of interest, is there anything particular you learned off Paul, or their kind of standout moments? I know you had him for a long time. There might be multiple things, but is there anything that you could kind of give the listeners a bit of an insight into?
There's one kind of quote that always sticks with me, but in general, Paul is infectious in his enthusiasm, and it was always genuine. Like there was always times in a session where Paul would get completely carried away because the kids or the adults, whoever he was coaching, were starting to get what he was coaching. And I mean, he was celebrating it like he's after winning All Ireland, you know. And that kind of stuff, it just sticks with you. And like if somebody's willing to be that happy for you to get a skill right, I mean, you're gonna put in that extra bit of effort on game day as well for them, you know. So that was probably the standout thing. But there's always one game I'll remember. It was a challenge game. I can't exactly remember what year it was, but it was with Carnmore, and we were playing our first senior hurling championship game the following maybe 2 weeks or something like that. And all I have is this abiding memory of Paul just roaring at me for the whole game. I was playing midfield and I had this kind of box-to-box roll up and down and just roaring, just keep going. You have to keep going. You don't have a choice. You got to keep going. And hardest thing I've ever done. That game just stands out as probably the biggest effort I ever put in. And after the game, then talking to him, he's like, "It's going to hurt, but it'll be worth it," you know.
Love it.
And kind of matching up that there is such a value and effort here. But the payoff in your own kind of personal reward, but also the reward for the team can be quite high. That's my kind of abiding memory of good coaching, I suppose. You got to put the effort into it. And the genuine enthusiasm is really important.
Brilliant. Is there any particular advice you've got? I know Paul would have been that answer, but from any other coach, even, you know, starting your own coaching career, not specifically with you playing, is there any advice that kind of stands out for you in case there's any younger coaches listening that might not have a mentor or might not have that someone like Paul to ask?
I suppose I've been very lucky with the people I've gotten to work with on the coaching side. And Ray Boyne is probably who I'd consider as a coaching mentor now as well. And Ray can go as in depth as you want into statistics, into performance measures, all that kind of stuff. But it always comes down to attitude and effort. And I think it's learning how to coach effort is a really important thing, or create opportunities for players to deliver maximum effort on a regular basis, rather than it being kind of like contrived drills or games that sometimes are too complicated for there to be a big actual physical effort involved. I think Ray's general outlook would be that a team will live and die on the level of the effort. You know, you can be super talented, but if the effort isn't there, good luck, you know. Yeah,
exactly. You're a pro. I've been asking a couple of my guests that question. So out of interest, seeing as you've mentioned it, how do you coach effort? Because that's something I've not trying to do myself, but trying to realise, how do you facilitate this, even though ultimately it is a decision I think the player just has to make in the moment?
I suppose coaching effort is, some of it is a personality trait, and there's some people that may never be able to do it. If you back them into a corner in life, still some people always give it their all. But I think it's when you're designing sessions, you have to try and work in this game or drill or whatever the case may be. Is there an obvious indication of where the effort level is? You know, and Ray was the expert at that, in that he'll track tackles. He'll take tackle stats for every small sided game there is, and tackles becomes his effort stat. You know, so it's a case of, do they understand? Have you created an understanding level with the players of what effort looks like? In camogie and hurling and football, it's becoming more and more that the tackle is the effort stat, over and above GPS numbers and all that kind of stuff. And if they understand that, if the players understand that, and you give them the opportunities in training by carefully designing games or drills, then if they understand what the effort is, and there's the opportunity to deliver some effort, it's after that, it's just consistency. Just, can they consistently have opportunities to develop the effort that they understand? You know, that's how we try to do it. And it's difficult, and sometimes you'll throw out 17 small-sided games that you've devised, and then the other 3 out of the 20 will be the ones you might continually go to. Then feeding it back to the players, like, how did you find out? How hard was it? Did you feel it was difficult there to get some tackles in? Maybe the space was too big. Maybe there wasn't enough players involved, you know. And then it becomes, there's an awful lot of running around, but it's not the kind of meaningful effort that's going to deliver the performance, you know. That'd probably be the kind of eye in the sky way of how we try to do it, is with games and understanding.
Do you think at this point, we mentioned even is it a student's game, you know, at the intercounty level, but can players hide even at club level now with GPSs, with tackle counts? Do you think that effort piece is now just becoming a bit of a non-negotiable across definitely all county, but, you know, in terms of club panels, do you think?
I think so. Like even on clubs that don't have GPS units there for players, some players are getting them on their own back and tracking it themselves. And it becomes well, God, if he's doing it, then I got to do it. You know, it's almost it's not bullying, but it's it's a kind of join us or leave us kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I do think it is hard to hide now. Like one example, last year with the senior camogie and Judes is having conversations with players that maybe aren't getting into the first team, or that maybe are a little bit frustrated with their performance. It's shining a light on, for the most part, it's the effort stat that people fall down on. It's not the tactical understanding, it's not the fitness, it's not the actual skill execution. Sometimes it's just you're not getting into positions where you're having an effect on the ball, and that's an effort stat. And we had one example with a girl who came to me towards the end of the season, and we had that conversation, and then she probably became one of the most effective tacklers for us over the next 3 games.
Wow.
It was just a case that she wasn't 100% sure before that what the tackle meant, and that's my fault as a coach, obviously. But once it was made clear to her, it wasn't that she wasn't fit enough to do it. It wasn't that she wasn't good enough to do it. It was just she didn't understand it well enough, and then she was able to deliver it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's
Very good. Out of interest then, sorry, we haven't gone near with the question list yet. This always happens in every single episode, but how often do you take feedback and give feedback to players? And I had Clean O'Connor on recently, and she said it's this eyeball to eyeball conversation that sometimes I think players, and I've probably shied away from it as a player, and maybe some coaches don't really have with players often, but how often would you do that?
Is it which Paul's book do you have there?
I have the coaching kids, and then I have the other one. I bought them together to
Yeah.
be the best you can be. Yeah.
Coaching children in sport one is it's basically that's the method that we employ. We use more or less the Carver framework with Judes Camogie.
Okay.
Even though it is technically a kid's approach, it's like you'll read it and you'll be like, you can do this with every adult. It's different, and it's raising awareness. So the feedback is live. It's we've been recording some of our ball alley sessions over the last couple of weeks, just little clips of it, and if you hear the vocals in the background, it's just pointing out when a player does something well, like look what Aisling did there, look how she tossed the ball out in front. That's feedback for everybody. It's also the reinforcement for Aisling, so that it's on the fly all the time in the session. The feedback on, look at this, see how that's going, pay attention to this the next time you're doing it. But from a kind of a one-to-one sit-down thing, it's mostly kind of conversations before and after training, and that doesn't happen with everyone. Like not everybody will come forward looking for the feedback. We won't always, as coaches, have the time to go around to everybody individually with a big squad. So I suppose to answer the question then is, there's feedback happening through the 75 minutes of the session. It might not be absolutely specific eye to eye, like Clean would say, with one player, but if everybody's listening, they can kind of take their own bit from it. If I'm making an example that what this girl did was really, really good and it's what we're looking for from the strike point of view, then if I'm one of the other players, I'm going to watch her for the next few reps, and then I'm going to try and emulate it, and you might not necessarily have given her the feedback, but she's taken the value of what the one-to-one feedback would be,
Yeah, that's really interesting. Out of interest, I know you've only done a few clips from the ball alley and it's very tight, but what was the thinking of recording some of those sessions? Was it for the players? Was it for your Instagram, or what was it for?
It was multi-purpose, really. It was for the players. And we took 2 reps out of each session as the kind of, this is what we're looking for. Literally, it's just a phone and a trimmed out video of the phone and been sent onto WhatsApp. So it wasn't high tech at all. But for the players' feedback, it's not necessarily everybody needs to see themselves. It needs to be a repeated message on raising awareness of this is what we're looking for. And the more they see it, the more they try to emulate it. They need less kind of coaching then in the session if they have a better understanding of what the positions or postures or skill looks like.
Okay. And you've noticed a difference then since then in the videos, have you?
Well, it's a difference in engagement. We've been back training in 2 weeks, so and look, all we're looking for is that girls are trying to change something. It doesn't need to be perfect, as long as it's their kind of pathway of trying to push it on.
Yeah.
And you see, we had one cue the last day we were using in camogie. If you're running at speed, in hurling, if you're running at speed, and you want to hit the ball on the front foot, is the old school way of talking about it. You have to toss the ball further in front, because your speed is going to catch up with the ball, and if the ball is starting to drift behind you, you're going to have to lean back with it. So the cue on that is obviously toss the ball further in front, but it's also don't be afraid to throw too far. I did this as a one-on-one session with one of Dublin's best inter-county camogie players, and she had like 3 fresh air shots. Missed the ball completely because it was too far in front, but that's a very obvious indication that she's putting the effort in to try and improve something. If she couldn't reach the ball because she threw too far in front, and then it's no different than your free throw shooting. You're just trying to gauge it in and out, where how much of the error far, short, left or right. But it's an easy one then to see when players are actually trying to do it. They might get worse temporarily, but that's it. Getting worse in the process of trying to get better is fine. Who cares at the end of the season?
Exactly. How do you measure the success of a training session then, in terms of early on in the season? Is it that looking at players trying to make that effort to change?
I suppose it's seeing if like one of the things that we've tried to encourage over the years is kind of peer coaching, and some of our players are much better at doing that than others. But if it's a real technical session like that, and we're trying to get things changed, we're trying to get them to tweak certain things, then the more peer coaching that's going on, I think the more engaged the players are.
Okay.
I think that would be probably how we gauge the success of the training session. If the goal of the session is technical development, if there's more peer coaching going on, I think that's a sign of success.
Okay, interesting. I know we originally connected over a couple of things, but one of the things that stand out for me was scanning and your approach to scanning. And I think you used a clip with Hannah Hegarty with her scanning and her ability to recognise the space and how to react to it. How do you teach scanning? Is it something that can be developed in players? Is it something that they develop themselves? How do you try to facilitate that as a coach?
I think in order to get to the higher levels, it has to be developed.
Okay.
I think there's probably a certain ceiling on the development of players who can and can't do it. Now, some people have it naturally, and in general, I don't know evidence to back it up or anything, but from talking to players and from knowing players a little bit better, it seems to be that the players that watch more games tend to develop these scanning skills a little bit more. And it's something we see a little bit more on the girls' side rather than the boys' side. That it's kind of more, you tend to see more guys watching games. Certainly in the GAA. I'm not sure what it's like in other sports. When you're watching your sport from a kind of a bird's eye view rather than your first person view when you're playing it, I think you start to develop a better sense for what the spacing is like and patterns of play. One thing, I can't remember who I was talking to about before, but one of the worst things that's happening is that the Sunday game or the match of the day type shows where all you see is clips. You don't see patterns. You see goals and you see sendings off and you see contentious decisions, but you don't see the 30 seconds of build up play that got them to a certain point. And I think it's important for the development of kids that they're watching full games, not full games, you know what I mean, what they're watching transitions of play. I think that's definitely a starting point, and that's where the kind of the video analysis stuff is coming back into it. Is when we were doing some clips last year, on any of the clips that I had to do, I purposely made them maybe 5 or 10 seconds longer than they needed to be, just so you kind of see how we led to this situation and what led out of it.
Okay.
Rather than just the tackle or the missed tackle or whatever it might be. It's, this is how you got yourself in this situation, and this is what happened as a consequence of it. And again, it's just trying to build a little bit more of a background understanding of the passages of play and all that. But with this one-to-one technical coaching that I'm doing with the Dublin Camogie at the moment, it's the first thing we cover with everyone's sessions. And I have it here in front of me, so pardon me for
no, not at all.
referring to it. The first thing is it's a video. It's a Kevin De Bruyne video. And it's become a more kind of a famous video now, that it's a 10-second clip. I think it's like in the 10 seconds he's looked to different points on the pitch.
Oh, I think I've seen that. Yeah.
24 times, I think it is. And then he receives the ball without looking, passes it to space, and the ball's in the back of the net about 3 seconds later, you know. And it's this case of there's no way he knows where his teammate is, where the space is, and where the opponents are without those constant checking what's going on. So we got that video first to kind of set it up. I can send it on to you, Twitter link. There's a Sky Sports article about Kevin De Bruyne and his scanning and his perception. And again, it's something for them to read to get a background on it. But then when we're talking about actually coaching it, again, it's raising the awareness. So that's where the video comes from. That's where the article comes from. Highlighting others that use it successfully. So sometimes we'll see clips like that clip of Higgs appreciating where the space was and moving to it in an instant. And then it's trigger questions. So you need to give the player something to use. So the trigger questions we have, again, I'm reading them here. Where am I? Okay, so it's the first thing you need to figure out. Where are you on the pitch? Where are the nearest players? All right, so that's opposition and teammates. Where's the space? Where's the ball? And where's the threat? And that might be a threat, a positive threat for us on their goal, or a negative threat on our own goal. And those are our trigger questions to start off with. If you're going to start trying to implement the scanning approach in your training games or in your preseason games, whatever the case may be, it's trying to get that information as often as possible. Where am I? Where are the nearest players? Where's the space? Where's the ball? Where's the threat? And it might not stick for months or years, but it's if you're constantly looking for that information, you start building this kind of database of what works and what doesn't work in these situations. There's that book, it's either Sports Gene or Outliers. It's one of them. They're basically the antithesis of each other, and they talk about this study that was done on, I think they were volleyball players. I think they were Danish, but I can't remember exactly who they were. But they showed them freeze frames of a volleyball game, like freeze frames, and the ball was removed. And the higher level players were able to pinpoint with higher degree of accuracy where the ball is than the lower players. And again, it's just they're so much more used to looking at the game, that when players are arranged in this situation and the body positions are in a certain way, the ball is there. And I know that, I think it must be outliers because it's a 10,000 hours type thing. The more you've spent that thing. I know there's loads of contention over that 10,000 hours rule, but that was the general outcome of that study, was the higher performing players had a better understanding of what was about to happen, so they were able to kind of ready themselves for it, whatever the case may be. So
can you sit down and enjoy a game then? Or are you constantly looking at what they're doing?
I can sit down and enjoy a warm-up. That's my that's what I do. I get as if I'm going to games, which is becoming rarer and rarer, unfortunately. It's watching warm-ups, because it's just find it fascinating how different people approach the same problem, and nobody's doing the same stuff, and it's so interesting. But you're trying to figure out, why are they doing that now, and why are they doing it in that order? Decision led them to do it in that order, and did the players decided, or did the coaches decided, or what's going on? It was a really interesting one when Dublin played Galway in the opening league game in TUD there a few weeks ago. I was there early, and Galway came out and they spent the first 10 minutes of the warm-up shooting. I'd never seen that before. in GA, I'd never seen it before. Straight into a shooting drill.
What do you think was the thinking behind that? What do you think?
I reckon it was a player's decision. They wanted to get as many reps at scoring. And this was backs and forwards shooting. So you're getting their quality striking. They're getting their quality striking towards the target. It wasn't necessarily for points and goals. But it seemed as though that would be what the players would have preferred. Okay. I thought that was really cool. If it was, I'm completely guesswork here now. Yeah. If that's what it was, then it's a kind of a player-led environment, and that's a cool thought as well.
Okay, yeah. Interesting. I heard I actually was on this podcast, episode 27 with Brian O'Loughlin, and he was saying a warm-up has to be always evolved, because if you do the same warm-up for 5 months, then your body's going to kind of be conditioned to the warm-up that it won't actually warm up your body. What would be your thoughts on that?
Basic overload, isn't it? Diminishing returns, I suppose. Again, warm-ups probably get a bit contrived now, and they probably get overcomplicated. When you think about the goals of what it is to get you ready to perform at highest intensity. I think it's David Morris. David Morris is to call him a statistician from Galway GAA would be a massive understatement. He was basically the Currafin coach for the last, I don't know, maybe 8-9 years. And I think it was him that I heard talking about, is that if you feel as though you have to work on your touch in a warm up, something's not going right on the coaching side. So it's the case of you shouldn't have to be spending 10 minutes to work on that. Let's get our bodies up to temperature. Let's do some game-based scenarios, and then let's get out and play the game. So I found that interesting. I learned that a lot, and again, it's players love getting loads of touches in the warm-up. Maybe it's a confidence thing, and you can't discount that either. But to hear somebody at that level of coaching talk about his warm-ups like that was a nice little learning one.
Brilliant. You mentioned it there before about 10,000 hours. With all of your individual coaching sessions, skill acquisition, which we're going to talk about, what do you make of the 10,000 hour rule?
For most of the kind of conversations around this kind of stuff around coaching, all I'm doing is parroting what other people I've heard other people talk about, or things I've learned from other people. So very little this is obviously original ideas, but it's always the content of what you're doing, isn't it? I could spend 10,000 hours pissing around up at the pitch and not get any better, but if it's deliberate practice, which I think what the original paper intended, but it was taken up as, I just need to do 10,000 hours of my sport. It's deliberate practice. And like the warm-up example you gave there, the same skill drill or the same small-sided game isn't going to deliver higher performance after you've done it a certain amount of times. Mm-hmm. So it's more of a kind of a mastery approach, is that at every given week or month or season, it's defining things that are the gaps in your performance and deliberately working towards it. And eventually it might come up to 10,000 hours, but I think the studies that have been done since have shown, I think mastered like pianists, maybe 4,000 hours, or there's been in and out. It's not the rule. It's more so, how much time have you spent deliberately practicing things that will make you a better athlete or performer, or whatever the case may be. So it comes down to coaching. It comes down to if you've actually worked on something worthwhile for those hours, rather than mindless stuff or recovery, as they say.
Yeah, brilliant. I had an interesting clip there yesterday from Dermot Connolly. Spins 45 on each foot on the outside of the boot. Some players, I think, are born with skill, and I think Dermot would be one of them. Now, I'm not discrediting his work, but there's just this certain element he has where I think, I don't know if you can teach that. Can you teach skill? Can you not create the next Dermot Connolly or Hannah Hegarty, but to what extent can you teach certain skills that they have?
I think that you're right in saying there's probably a ceiling on it, because when they get to the adult level, they've been doing it for years, and you're running out of time to change something, particularly when seasons are coming in back to back and club seasons are running into intercounty seasons. When do you actually get a chance to stop, break down something that you need to improve on, and methodically work up towards it? I think the best comparison I ever heard about Dermot Connolly was that he was like Allen Iverson. He picked it all up just messing around on the streets and in the greens and the estates and all that kind of stuff, and there's no coaching in it. It's just, he was probably bored and decided to work on that outside of the boot strike for, I don't know, 6 weeks in some summer.
Yeah.
And he's absolutely nailed it. So I think to a certain extent, a lot of these kind of highly skilled players that we see, and like Keane Lynch in the hurling side is probably the very same. It's a lot of kind of early age messing about at the pitch or down at the local green, trying to work on your skills as a kid. And yes, we can try to hone some of that stuff a little bit as they become adults, and if we're seeing them in different setups, but I think there is a limit on how far you can bring somebody's basic skills if they didn't develop it earlier on in life, and look, that kind of puts some of the onus back onto the juvenile coaches. I think the standard of juvenile coaching, particularly in GAA, is starting to creep up quite a lot. So hopefully we'll be seeing more of those type players coming along.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, particularly maybe juvenile, maybe even teenagers, do you think coaches should facilitate that? I think they call it like free play, and just let players kind of experiment and discover.
Definitely. Definitely. I think you kind of see it happen naturally. And just when I was a kid, I remember when we went up to the pitch for training, I don't know, we might be 5-10 minutes early, and you'd be spending it like doing some freestyle skills or trying to shoot sidelines from impossible angles and all that kind of stuff. But you weren't told to do it. It was fun and it was hard. So you were always trying to work on it, you know. So there has to be some room for that. And there has to be some room for it even at an intercounty level, I think, as well, of just let them just experiment at something. It can be hard. It can be hard if the player's unaware of where the gaps in their skills are. It can be hard to just let them off and expect them to develop it. So maybe some guided stuff, but I suppose the hours get accumulated in free time. So the big example is in Judes. There's the 3 Gannon sisters. I think there's times where you'll see them every day, and sometimes multiple times a day down at the pitch of the ball alley. And it's no wonder now that the 3 of them are in the Dublin intercounty setup. 2 of them are only 18. Neve is still only like 21. And they're becoming some of the most powerful, skillful players in the county, you know.
I was going to ask you actually, in terms of this kind of pre-training activity term that's been thrown around with Judes or with Dublin last year. I know you're not at every session with Dublin now, but is there kind of an onus on players to show up early and to practice, whether it's that free play or their kind of their weaknesses, say?
With the club stuff, like, we always have to be very conscious of the club stuff. It's technically at a lower level when you look at it from a kind of a hierarchy point of view. So I think the demands of asking players to be at club sessions 40 minutes, an hour early is over the top, you know. It's not what they're doing for a lot of the times. The intercounty players sometimes be used to it and they drive it at club level, but it's not an expectation at club level. At the moment with Dublin, it's a big focus from the point of view of trying to develop those skills. And what they've done is they've 3 separate kind of groups before a session. So the goalkeepers will have this before they warm up with the S&C coach. The goalkeepers will be working on something, the defenders will be working on something, and the attackers and midfielders will be working on something. And what was nice, I was at one session a couple of weeks ago, it was nice to see is that one of the players that I'd seen for the one-on-one coaching had taken the drill that we were doing and was sharing it with the other defenders. It was a decision-making thing on when to carry the ball out of defence or when to actually plant and strike. And that's what they were working on. So it's that they're given the structured time of you need to work on something here relating to defending. Mm-hmm. It's not always prescribed exactly what. And that was kind of, they took what they were working on previously and brought it forward, you know.
Out of all the players then you've seen, you've coached, you've played with or against, and even just what you said there about a player taking what you've done and teaching others, that's brilliant to hear. What are the common characteristics of those elite players that are just those that just stand out at intercounty level? They're just a different level of gravy compared to the rest, even at club level that maybe never progressed to county. What makes that difference for you?
There has to be a certain level of selfishness. We've had this conversation a lot with Nadia and the time that we'd spend in the gym. In my own selfishness to trying to learn more about what makes her tick, it has to come down to that. It's not being afraid to upset or let certain people down because you need to do something for your development. So there always has to be selfishness, and it comes down to like choosing not to do stuff with mates or with family or whatever the case may be because you've got to prioritize something else. There has to be some intrinsic motivation. I think we all learned that from watching Jordan's documentary, or technically a Chicago
Bulls one, but it was just a Jordan one.
That there always has to be some internal motivation to do better or to beat somebody or to beat someone or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And I think the kind of intelligence side of it as well, like not academic intelligence. One of the best players I ever played with, Niall Donahue, would never have been described as the most intellectual or academic intelligence, but my God, he was a genius on the field, you know. So I think there has to be intelligence related to the sport, and some of that is from watching games, watching performances, and studying the sport. And some of it is emotional intelligence as well, as knowing how to deal with coaches and physios and players and nutritionists and everything to get the most out of it. So yeah, the selfishness, the self-motivation, and the some form of that intelligence as well.
How do you keep it fun? Fun might be the wrong word for players or for athletes, let's say like Nadia, who knows she's missing X, Y, or Z to be in the gym or to be on the track today, and try keep that sustainable, because it's a very long time training for, let's say, an Olympic Games. 4 years is very long. How do you sustain that enjoyment level? Because sport is supposed to be enjoyed. I think a lot of athletes are there for the enjoyment piece, but when they're missing so much, how do you keep it enjoyable as a coach?
I suppose it's for some people when they have that kind of self-motivation of making progress, it's been able to demonstrate or measure that progress. Going to go with a completely unashamed shout out here to we use the Output Sports advice and a lot of let's say, for example, in Nadia's gym sessions, to be able to demonstrate what's happening with her progression in terms of barbell speed, or jump height or ground contact time and all that kind of stuff. And if an athlete is motivated enough to make progress, when they see that progress consistently in the gym, then it's pure dopamine, it's that sugar rush type sensation. And it's, I don't care if I'm missing out on this night out with my friends. I just hit a PB in the gym yesterday, that's keeping me going. That's giving me that dopamine hit for the week. It's just consistently demonstrated progress. I think they're performance junkies, they get that hit, then to hell with the tapas on a Saturday night.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something I briefly discussed, and maybe I didn't talk with him, but Sean Canan, the episode just went out there. He has this great term, if you're not measuring, you're guessing, I think it is. But that kind of relates to that, because if Nadia, let's say, for example, just taking Nadia, if you're not measuring, let's say, with a system what she's doing, she won't get that. She'll feel probably a little bit better, but if she knows that's a PB or that's an improvement, or, just looking at the data, that'll give her that dopamine hit. And you can apply that to any sport and to any player, I think.
It's buy-in as well, isn't it? Like, it's very easy. It's very easy show up every day to a coach that is helping you improve. If you've any doubt over it whatsoever, then it starts to fade away pretty quickly. Or maybe not pretty quickly, but you start the seeds of doubt start to come in. It's like, I'm not sure if I'm actually improving here. And if you're showing it and you're demonstrating, and it's not guessing, it's not subjective, it's purely objective stuff, then you're onto a winner with it.
Yeah, totally. Out of interest, do you prefer, this is a question in from somebody, do you prefer coaching individuals or a team?
This was a tricky, I get asked it all the time, because what's interesting is a lot of the individuals that I coach are friends with the players I coach on the team.
Okay. So you better be careful with this answer.
Yeah, I don't want to fall out with anyone. But the way I always frame is we try to always coach an individual. I'm going to sit on the fence completely here, Orla, by the way. You try to always coach the individual, and if you're not, and you're just giving people blanket approaches, and there's no kind of, we talked about feedback earlier on, if there's no avenues for an individual to improve, then it's not really worth it. There's an awful lot more pressure coaching the individual.
Okay.
Because when you're coaching a team, certain individuals on that team might make you look good, and we can never get carried away with a team's performance as a coach, because at the end of the day, it's a hugely complex system.
Yeah.
And wins and losses and performances are ultimately down to the players, particularly in sports where it's not a centimeters, seconds, or whatever sport. But when it comes down to something like track, and does come down to seconds, then it's a very measurable performance, and it's a very simple recipe for it. And if your side of the recipe is the reason why the times aren't there, then there's a lot of pressure on that. So I think from that point of view, the individual coaching is much more challenging from a pressure point of view and an accountability point of view. Whereas the team stuff is, a lot of coaches can, and I've made no secret over the fact that Jude's Camogie success is primarily player based. There's enough good players there that if Mickey Mouse was coaching them, they'd have won championships. So there's less pressure involved. from that point of view, you could take that as maybe it's a little bit more enjoyable to coach a team, but it depends on what you're motivated by. You know, if what gets you out in the morning is being under that little bit of pressure to perform for the athletes that's trusting you with your services, then I mean that's more enjoyable for some people. You know.
Okay, because that's something that I mentioned with Cliona. I asked her, how do you balance developing or improving one person over 30? And I mentioned what I was doing to you before we hit record and your technical coaching. Do you think that's a solution now that other teams might look at? And do you think it's just this huge area of development that you think the GAA will go down? Because basketball, you can get a trainer, you can do a lot of individual stuff, even in a team workout, because there's less players, you've positional coaches, and the way they structure it in America is very interesting in college. Do you think the GAA are going to start potentially going down that route of individual coaching, and where you not even involve the team, could you even hire out a coach for an hour and do an individual based practice?
I think it's a great gap, but it's going to come down to cost and logistics, because the coaches in colleges in the US on the basketball side are getting paid, and the players are most of them are going to be on scholarship, getting everything covered for them. Whereas a GAA player that wants to go and work on set pieces or whatever, if they're paying it out of their own pocket and the coach is doing it as a job, then they need to charge a certain amount and the player pay a certain amount. And we all know that coaching is about consistency. So if that's £100 every week, you know, there's a barrier there. There's a gap there for it to happen, and I think it can lead to a lot of development in individual skills, but the cost of it is going to come down unless it is a case that county boards and management groups are subsidising it or paying for it. I don't think it would take off. You know?
Okay, interesting. We're speaking a lot about the individual element of the game. How much of a team is down to that individuality and individual ability? What do you think?
I saw, do you ever see rugby strength coach Kerr Wynnum Flat on Twitter?
I haven't seen him yet. I have to follow him.
It was only this morning he put up a video of like they're doing the murmurations, the startings, and it's all over the place, and it's one individual moves and the next one beside it reacts, and then it creates this lovely thing. I don't know, it's a very tough question. Like, I suppose you can have the individual talent and you can have teams that have 5-6 great individually talented players, but if it's not working for the team, or if the team can't relate to them, or if it's just not gelling together, then it falls down. I mean, there's certain teams that we've come up against at different times that you look at the players on paper and you're like, we should have a very tough time against this team, but the individual doesn't buy into what the team are trying to do, and the team performance is bog standard, you know. So I suppose how much of a team performance comes down to the individual. At the end of the day, it's all individuals, but if those individuals aren't working and pulling in the same direction, then it's probably going to go the other way, you know. It's important. You don't win games with donkeys, you know. You can compete, but you probably don't win a lot of games. You definitely don't win championships. But it's a case of, if those talented individuals aren't buying into the team ethos or the team game, it's worthless, you know. It's mostly worthless.
How do you define talent? I heard an interesting phrase. It was talent is a muscle, but what would be your definition of talent?
Talent is a muscle. I hadn't heard that one.
Full credit to somebody on Twitter. It definitely wasn't me.
We didn't learn about it in our anatomy class, but anyway. I suppose it's potential. Realized potential. So we all have a certain amount of potential, but it's only talent when you realize it. As in, like, you execute it and you bring it to the table. And we all know players, or played with players, or coached players, that you can see the potential there, but they're not necessarily a talented player because they haven't brought it on, you know. So realized potential, I suppose, is what I'd see as talent. Mm-hmm. I've got coaching players at the moment that are some of the most technically gifted players, but their potential to perform at a really high level is huge, but there's one or two ingredients that they're just not working on, and that's where it's falling down. So they've got potential. they might be deemed another. We wouldn't deal it as they're not talented. We deal as you got to bring these things, and then you might be considered by others as a really talented player. We can see the little bits when we're coaching them a couple of times a week. But the people who are watching them play on a Sunday will see them as maybe average. And we're seeing these little glints, and it's like, oh, I wish that this would happen or that would happen. And there's so much that you could be talented,
Yeah, it's really frustrating. Sometimes you're just like, if only. Yeah. And it's the biggest thing I've only kind of realised it recently, but since really taking coaching seriously, is players decide their own destiny. It's not me, their coach. It's up to them. And that's sometimes really frustrating, because I know the player wants it, and I just know where they're not they're not putting in the effort. They're taking the piss of training. They just don't realise what they could be, and it's so frustrating sometimes.
Yeah. Look, some of that, we've had issues with it in the past as well. Some of it is maybe some insecurity too.
Good point.
It's the fear of failing at it. Like, they probably know themselves that they're good, but if they try hard and fail, then that could be crushing for them.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to, okay, is it a safe space to fail in that coaching group, or is it being criticized too much and everything? So it's I suppose trying to let them know it's okay if you don't do too well. You're still going to be part of the squad. You're still going to be part of the team. But if you bring that effort and fail, who gives a shit? Just try again the next time,
Yeah, exactly. There's a great pal of yours, you were on the podcast, Peter Wright. I've now become obsessed with Sidesteps, thanks to him and thanks to Neil Welch. So I'm also always looking up clips, and I always send them clips of players and whatever. There was a great one of Breach stacked there this morning. But how do you develop a sidestep in a player? I think something that we're probably drawn on my own experience as a underage player, but it was never really taught, even from like a skill side of things, of when to use a sidestep, never mind from kind of a strength and conditioning, performance side of things. How do you coach a player that sidestep?
It is a skill. And then we got to break down skill. Always having conversations about the skill acquisition police that are trolling Twitter, trying to tear people's good work down, just because it doesn't fit nicely into an academic paper. But when you look at what a skill is, it's executing something with accuracy, with speed in a game situation, and it was the right decision at the time. That's probably what you can look at skill being. But it's got certain components. It's got like physical components. It's got the actual range of motion needed to make the shape of the sidestep, the strength to hold yourself in those positions, the ability to move in and out of those positions. So that's kind of taking the real technical side of it. Maybe the strength coach's job or the athletic development coach's job, or if they're injured, it's the physio's job, kind of a thing. You have to have the physical qualities to be able to make the shapes and do it in a structured, predictable, non-competitive environment first. So that's the difference between change of direction training and agility training, obviously. And once they do that, then it comes down to the scanning thing. It's like, okay, well, when is that useful? When can you use it? When is the opportunity there? Is the constraints of the game or what's happening with their opponent affording the sidestep? And then it's a case of just, if we want to develop something like that, it's about creating games in training or creating situations in training where the use of the sidestep is the best option. But you're not telling them to sidestep. We've created the technical abilities, whether it's the range of motion, the strength, the coordination, or the power to be able to create the positions. They've developed their understanding of when it's useful. Here's a game, and you've designed it so that using sidesteps might be the most efficient and accurate way to do it. By the book, that's the way to do it. In action, in reality, do we ever really get the chance to work through all of those things carefully? Possibly not. But that's how you would do it. But a lot of that can come down to, you need to coach the individual first, and then you need to bring them into the team environment, and you need the structure of the training sessions and games to afford more sidestepping, so that it becomes a kind of an inbuilt option in their game.
Mm-hmm. Quick shout out to Ray Boyne for this question. What do you think is the most important development need in a player at the moment?
I'll put it straight back on them. Then it's understanding the effort required to perform. So often the players will train and feel really comfortable, and they'll show up on game day and they get blown out of the water because they didn't understand the effort that was required to execute the game plan in a competitive environment. And that's a skill no more than anything else. And it's Ray's drilled it into me. Pretty sure he drills it into every team and every player he works with. You can be your Jim McConnelly with your outside of the boot 45s, but if the effort isn't there, you're not part of the team. I think that's the best one for it. Development needs player is how much do you understand what it takes to deliver performance.
I've been fascinated with the concept of leadership, and I started the leadership series, which I'm really enjoying. How do you develop leadership in players? And the ones I'm talking about is I've learned that there's so many different ways of leadership. Like, it's not just screaming at players. There's a great quote from Brian O'Driscoll. It's an everyday thing. It's not just on a Saturday evening or Saturday afternoon. How do you develop leadership in players in any form, whether it's verbal, where it's just their actions on the pitch? What can you do as a coach to develop that?
It's probably very difficult. The first serious coaching job I had was with the St.Judes Camogie team, and anybody that knows the team in the club knows that they've been friends for 20 years. So I inherited a bunch of leaders and a leadership group. We didn't set about to say, well, you need to be more vocal and you need to do it on the pitch. It was just natural players within there that had that, and through growing up together, and yes, there's different age groups, but they all would have kind of played around the same time. They're a reasonably young team. There's always the players that when they were 8 and 9, they looked to, okay, what are we supposed to do here? How are we supposed to act? And that's in the senior camogie team at the moment. We've got vocal leaders, we've got effort leaders, we've got skill leaders, we've got jokers, we've got all of these people there. We tried, when I came in originally, we tried to kind of contrive it a little bit, and then realized pretty quickly that this already exists, so we're wasting our time, and it's just about letting it go ecologically. But that's at club level, which is in GAA. It's a community, it's there. You can't really change it. There's no transfer market. You can't bring in a leader because there isn't one there. This is what you're dealt with, and if it's not there, you got to try and foster it some way. So I've never had to do it at club level. At intercounty level, from my own playing experience and the coaching side of it, if it's not there, it becomes very contrived. From something that's like you're trying to force them to be leaders when maybe they're not necessarily that way inclined. The example I had was, I hope none of these people ever. When I was playing in Galway, we had a captain who was quiet, and the players in the team didn't necessarily respond to silence or the kind of quiet word in the ear. They wanted the kind of rah-rah coach to get you motivated, and that was left down to the management then, and sometimes that created friction, where the managers were trying to have to be the leader of the players when really that should be from within. So I think putting a manager or putting a captain or vice captain or leadership group in place from what you think the players that should be in it is a bit too contrived. And I suppose you see the greatest leadership coming in team sports from a group of players that have played and tussled together for multiple years, and it's evolved who the leaders are, and I think the best example there is probably the Kilkenny hurling team from like the mid-noughties into the tens. Just had players that were always there, that became the example for the younger players or the players coming into the squad, that didn't probably necessarily get put down as, well, I'm the leader of this team, but you've been there long enough and you've performed at a high enough level with this level of effort and this approach that if I'm coming into this team, I'm going to look up to him because I've been watching him on TV for the last couple of years, and he's what I look up to, you know. Yeah, I suppose there has to be some level of natural development, and that's difficult for coaches and management teams coming in to meet 30 players for the first time. You're trying to figure out who the leaders are. Sometimes you just got to sit back for a couple of months and watch their engagements, watch who's talking in huddles, watch who's leading by example. And sometimes I just survey the players. That's what Adrian did with Dublin last year. Is he surveyed the players, like who do you want to be your captain? And it came back as Hannah and Ash, you know, and it was whoever came up with the most votes is the captain, and whoever came up with the second most was the vice captain. And like, it would have been exactly who you'd have picked anyway. You know, you'd have picked Hannah and Ash because all that the young Dublin players or the under 16s coming through, you ask them who's their favourite player or who do they see as a leader, and they'll talk about, if they're on the south side, they might talk about Haggerty. If they're on the north, they might talk about Ashmar. But they have a great kind of working relationship in that they're very different people, very different approaches, but are two absolutely genuine born leaders for the clubs and for their county, you know.
Mm-hmm. How do you, as a coach then, how do you maximise that, let's say, the leadership group? Like, that's nearly become cliche, but it's nearly, because everyone else has a leadership group, we have to put one in, and because, you know, there's captains, you know, we have to have one. But how do you maximise that relationship as a coach with the leadership group, with the captain, to have a positive effect on the team?
I think it's leave it alone. Maybe create the group, but let them figure out themselves what their role is and what they need to bring attention to. Again, if you're sending them away with tasks or activities or that kind of stuff, it becomes contrived, and it's like these I don't know, I always remember things like from The Office and everything. Like, you bring in somebody to talk, and it's supposed to be a team bonding thing, and everybody's just sitting down, bored, senseless. You know, it has to be natural. And I think the role of the leadership group has to come from the players and from the leaders themselves, rather than being delivered from the top down.
Yeah. You just reminded me of that first aid scene. Have you seen that one?
Hello, Clarice. Yeah.
I've asked a lot of coaches this question. Sorry, if you need to go, let me know. I know we're well over time, but how often do you practice the fundamental skills in a training session, say a group training session, for example, with Judes? I know it's interesting. Like, I asked a player this recently, he's a professional basketball player, and he said, we never practice the fundamentals, because if you don't have the fundamentals at this level, then sure, you wouldn't be here. So how often, now obviously that's in a very different environment, different sport, different level, but how often do you practice the fundamentals with Judes?
I suppose I've been working with them now for a number of years, and kind of have this list in my head of things that we're not good at. Now, you might have another coach come in that think, oh, no, you are good at that, but when you're seeing it every day, you start picking up on the small details. And I would say striking is probably one of them, which is an absolute basic of the sport. We have players who have absolutely unbelievable striking abilities, but as a group, you wouldn't put us at the top of the pack, you know. I don't think anyway. So that becomes a kind of priority for us to work on. So yes, every time you go out and train, you have to strike the ball, but it's about designing the session so that there's a point in it where the success or the failure of the drill or the game depends on the quality of the strike. So it might be still a small-sided game or a full-sided game, but if the striking isn't up to par, it's okay, well, we've not done well on that, or it's a quick whistle stop, raise awareness of it. The strike isn't at a high enough quality, and we're working on the strike then as part of a gameplay drill. So, and you'll probably find that with the example that you gave, is that, we don't work on the fundamentals, but there's shooting and rebounding and screening and every single thing that they're doing. So it's just at what level are you working on the fundamentals? And that's the skill acquisition coming out. If it's the actual technique, that's the breaking down side. Well, then you got to do some technique work, which is what gets frowned upon these days, like the ball alley stuff or the the repetitive free throw shooting or all that kind of stuff sometimes gets frowned upon. But if that's the weak link in the skill execution, and that's the priority of the training, if it's falling down from the point of view of under pressure, with an opponent closing down on you, your strike is poor, well, that's skill acquisition, and that's repeating that environment over and over again until it improves. But if the reason they're not hitting the ball well when the players closing down on them is because they technically aren't able to strike the ball well in the first place, then you're just like, it's like trying to train a dog. I don't know if you can probably hear my dog downstairs. He's a reactive rescue dog, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to get him to learn to react less. But if he's
there he is.
The problem is that people walking by the window downstairs. His basic reaction all the time is, oh shit, then we got to train it out of him at a much lower level. So it's about bringing them somewhere near a dog where they can see them, they're not a threat, and that he can kind of just, okay, well, I can do it here. That dog is far enough away, I'm not panicked. It's the same thing with the striking. It's like, can we get it? At what level is it breaking down? And that's where we need to work on it.
How do you test and challenge players? And for example, with that Judes team, like obviously there's a huge amount of intrinsic motivation, huge amount of talent, but when you're coming off, a lot of success, a couple of county championships, how do you keep them coming back wanting more and challenging them on improving even more? Like, it's like that, there's a great, like, it's not even a saying, but it's just known fact that when you reach, let's say, an 80% ability, to improve by 1% will take twice the effort of somebody going from 0 to 10. How do you keep testing and keep challenging your players?
The simple one, the Judes example, the simple one is they haven't achieved what they want to achieve yet. So from that point of view, that's their own personal and group motivation is still there, that according to them, and I totally agree with them, and everybody in the club and most people in the county would probably agree, is that they've actually underachieved for the talent that's there and for the opportunities we've had beyond Dublin. We've had 3 cracks at it now, and we haven't won a game in Leinster yet. The team feel as though, and we feel as though, we've underachieved. So
okay,
they're not satisfied yet. So that helps.
Yeah.
If we'd gone on and won a Leinster championship or won a Leinster game and then won a Leinster championship and then maybe got to an All-Ireland final or won that, then it might become, okay, we've achieved that, and then it's about trying to find some more motivation. But they're definitely not. They're not where they want to be yet. But from that point of view, then is okay. That's a season goal. That's an outcome goal. But the showing up and working hard and keeping them motivated or keeping them accountable that way. We've started, again, inspired and influenced by Ray, trying to measure as much as we can in training sessions. Our game is built around effort and tackling, so we're trying to get tackle counts in small-sided games and in full-sided games, or certain times in kind of drills. We'll try and measure something so that they have a yardstick every time they go out and train, that this is better, worse, or the same as the last day. And the only thing I was going to say is, if it's worse, I don't have to say anything. They get very annoyed with themselves when they're not improving. If it's the same, look, then maybe there's a little bit of coaching required. If it's better, job done. They've improved, and the satisfaction of that. But yeah, having some measure of where they're at on any given day, that relates to our actual performance in our games is an easy way to keep them accountable.
Brilliant. Sounds very easy then for you, eh?
It is, yeah. Just like I said, create a few training sessions and let them off, and let them give out to each other and praise each other and all that kind of stuff. Just make time.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Could it be the All Blacks saying, it's near the end of the year, the coach doesn't need to be there. It's the players. It's the players driving the session, running the session. You can just sit in the car and have a cup of tea if you want. Yeah,
it's facilitating it. Certain times of the year, you got to jump in. You got to be the voice, and you really have to drive it home. But like if you're approaching kind of peak season and you're still having to call them out on effort and call them out on attitude and stuff like that, then it becomes ominous. What's going to happen first game of the season. We've had that issue. Even in successful seasons, we've had that issue of, on a given week coming up to a game, you can almost predict that I don't think we're going to go too well here at the weekend. Necessarily share that with them, like what kind of communication is that on a Thursday night that I don't on that, but sometimes you can see it coming down the tracks, and you're kind of preparing for, if it's a knockout game, obviously you got to intervene. If it's a dead rubber game or a group game, you can kind of maybe use it as a learning experience. Here's what we did last week. Here's what got done to you on Sunday. What are we going to do next week? And some of our best performances have come off the back of being beaten, or drawing, or whatever the case may be, where the players are so annoyed with the fact that they couldn't deliver the performance that they wanted to. But obviously, if it's coming up to a semi-final or a final and you see this kind of attitude on Tuesday or Thursday, there's a lot of maybe coaching that has to happen then. And a lot of it is the kind of the approach and the mindset stuff, not necessarily the skill or the execution stuff. But I suppose it's what's the worst thing that could happen about losing at the weekend? Do you get knocked out? If you can, you got to do something about it. If it just means that you have to win the next game, then that's kind of appealing sometimes,
Yeah, that makes sense. Out of interest then, on game day, how much coaching do you give them, whether it's during the game, at half time, or, well, that would have been the water breaks, but how much coaching do you do in a game then?
Changes, and it's been one of the criticisms that I've gotten back off the players at times, was sometimes I can go missing a little bit on the sideline. Not that I'm in charge of their performance or I can contribute on the scoreline or anything like that, but on certain games, they have felt like this is the beauty of being there for a few years. They can straight up tell me, it's like, you didn't give us what we needed today, Sometimes I can be a bit within myself and try and either watch the game or trying to make decisions on the sideline with Marion or with PO or with Ger or whoever, and not really give the information into the field, and then other times it's like I'm demented up and down the sideline. Go here, look at that pass, she's inside you. Are you happy with the shape? Where's the puck out going to go? Are we ready for it? All that kind of stuff. And I think, not that it's a case that they wouldn't have done it anyway, but I think the energy coming from the sideline has a definitely brings more to that team. Whether it's just from if they hear more noise, they stay more focused, or is it a case that, okay, they're not really sure what to do in a certain situation, they need a little bit of coaching from the sideline. But it's been a consistent criticism over the years of my performance on game day, is that sometimes I'm not vocal enough.
Okay.
Something that I'm trying to work on. It was definitely the case in our last Leinster game this year against Oulart, that either trying to be too clever by figuring out what was going on, but then forgetting about the fact that there was actually a game happening and the minutes are counting down, So I find that I need to be, for the team, for what they want, I need to be a little bit more present in the play-by-play, and let somebody else deal with, okay, I wonder what's going on with the shape and all that kind of stuff.
Would you see that as one of the hardest parts of trying to be a coach? And even when you mentioned they're trying to figure out what's going on, but trying to realise that I still need to be vocal, I'm still in a game here. Is that kind of one of the toughest elements for you?
It is, yeah. And the same fellow I brought up earlier, David Morris, when I met him, when I started coaching Judes, I met him just for a bit of advice and all that kind of stuff. And he said, the first thing he says, like, you've got very low sideline miles. You haven't seen enough decisions go against you. You haven't made enough wrong substitutions. You haven't set up a team in the wrong way enough to have learned enough about it. So it's like, for the first few years, you're going to make decisions that are wrong because you don't know any better, and you haven't seen it go one way or another enough. And I think that's what I'm going through at the moment, is need more miles on the sideline to be able to figure out, okay, well, in this sort of situation, it's actually better if we set up a bit more defensive, or if we go to sweep, or whatever the case may be. Right now it's kind of just still baby coach trying to figure out what might happen,
Okay, interesting. So now, purpose is a bit deep, I think, but why do you coach? What do you enjoy about it? What's kind of the thrill for you?
I do like the whole problem solving approach to it. I suppose when I look at coaching, I try to think of it as a little bit more of what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is rehab, which is physio. Somebody coming in with a problem, and you got to try and create a treatment plan that's going to solve it. So you get a team coming in with a performance, or an athlete coming in with a performance. that they are not happy with or want to improve on. It's trying to break it down into what are the key components that are going to elevate this performance. So that side of it, I love the problem solving side of it. I've learned, I suppose, to embrace the kind of relationships that you build up. It's reasonably intimidating going into a new team with 30 odd players and trying to get to know them. But over the years, you do get to know them. You get to have better conversations with them, and it becomes more like you've got 30 new friends, you know. And like, obviously there's a line there as well when you're the coach and the player. We would have learned an awful lot about like unequal power relationships in college, sometimes from a legal medicine point of view, and there has to be a certain distance there. But I'd be pretty confident if I bumped into one of the girls or fellas that I've coached over the years, I'd be able to sit down in a coffee shop or a pub and chat away for 2-3 hours. You know, you develop that relationship. That's been great for me, kind of embedding into the community around Judes. Is that a lot of those players, I'd know their families, I'd know their boyfriends and girlfriends, uncles, all this kind of stuff. I know where they work, all that kind of thing. You feel as though you become part of the community. And I suppose to go on a bit of a tangent, when we opened the clinic then in Judes, it was amazing the support we got, you know. And we do put a lot of it down to myself and Thomas about previously being involved and giving ourselves to the club from a volunteer's point of view. Not that we were trying to cash in on a goodwill check when we opened the clinic, but people were knocking down the door to come in and see us. We had some people even asking us to print out vouchers so they could give us some cash flow the week that we opened. Wow. You know, it's just stuff like that, and like that comes back to the relationships and coaching. So I suppose, yeah, to answer your question, it's the problem solving thing I love, and it's like building a new family, you know, when you're coaching. It's great.
Brilliant. Yeah. Whether through your role as a coach or physio, how do you think you've evolved in that coaching role? Because you made a good point, in your day job that is still coaching to a certain extent, even though it is a little bit different.
I don't know. I suppose because when you're physio that you have to kind of stick to. And we obviously evolve those over time, and you use certain principles more when you're working with a certain person. But you got to have a set of guiding principles, like the ones that we use, myself and Thomas, would be that we have to respect biological healing. So that's primary. People are coming in here with an active injury, we got to respect that. But our other principle is that we got to kind of restore athletic normal. So we have to get this person to be more athletic while appreciating that they are injured. And then with coaching, it's the very same. You have a certain set of principles that you know should work, and it's about finding what works with them. And I think the only way that I've evolved as a coach is that I can identify which principles are going to work with in a certain environment, you know, whether it's an individual athlete coming in with performance needs, or whether it's a team coming in with gameplay needs. It's trying to distill very quickly what is going to make a difference.
Brilliant. From your first year, I know you are still involved obviously with Dublin, but not as much. But what was your biggest learning from that first season with Dublin at that intercounty level?
It's probably a lot of work to do, which I suppose when you're starting any kind of a job, it's about identifying what the issue is, or what the gap is. And it's no secret that Dublin Camogie has struggled for a few years, you know. But I think seeing up close and personal what that looks like at an intercounty level was very, very valuable to try and solve it in the short term with the players that are there, but also looking forward to okay, when there's younger players coming through, this is what we need to expect, that maybe there has been a shortfall in technical coaching at some point in their development, and that at an intercounty level we're having to try and develop that, which isn't happening in Galway, isn't happening in Kilkenny or Tipperary or these teams. They're receiving players into their intercounty setups that are very, very skillful, and we're receiving players into intercounty setups that are probably a little bit more, maybe sometimes a little bit more athletic, but not necessarily better camogie players. So that was one of them. But I suppose also, like, from a psychological point of view, like, I mean, you get it just in general day-to-day life as well. Everybody's a function of what's happened to them in the past. When you've been thrown around between multiple managers over 4 years, it affects you, you know. drains your confidence. They get told a certain thing by one manager and another thing by another manager, and it's conflicting, and all of a sudden you don't know who you are, you don't know what you're capable of, and you just become a kind of a, I don't know, like I think somebody labelled them before as damaged goods, which isn't fair. But when you look at it in the cold light today and see how they've just been tossed between coaching setups because of different disagreements, then that's sometimes what they are. There's absolute serious talent there. There's serious potential in that group of players. There's a management ticket there now that has the skills to develop that incredibly. And with the squad that's there at the moment, there's a big realization that they're part of something progressive. Everything that they need and want, I think, is there. And what I've learned is that they are sponges for getting better. Use the rescue dog a little bit more, as rescue dogs will love you the most. They need some love, they want some attention, and you give it to them and they'll be a great companion.
The girls will be delighted to listen to this now.
Yeah, they're like rescue dogs, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
A little bit of a chip on the shoulder, which is always valuable. But when you give them what they need, they can be incredible, and they've shown that they have been incredible. Different performances, sessions, what they've brought to the table. The raw materials are there. It's just about trying to put the finished product on it. And that could take months, could take years, could take a decade for Dublin Camogie to be the powerhouse that it was before. But right now it's a case of trying to figure out how do we get the performance on game day with all the raw materials that are there.
Yeah. As a coach, what would be your non-negotiable behaviours that players have to buy into when you're trying to create that culture, that setup? I think I know what one of them is anyway, but yeah.
Definitely effort, yeah. Effort is the non-negotiable. Other than that, it's probably more so at club level, because at intercounty level you tend to get everyone shows up all the time. But at club level it's attendance. The more coaching you get, the better you can be. So consistency essentially. It's the same in strength training, it's the same in rehab. Those who consistently give their body the stimulus do better, and then after that it's do they have the understanding? Okay, can we get them to a level, or can we have them understanding the game a little bit more? And that comes down to the watching games, comes down back to scanning. Is non-negotiables from the point of view of intercounty camogie at the moment, I think needs to be a higher level understanding of the game.
Okay, interesting. I love the way you say commitment there. I think we've seen from so many teams just over the years that, and I would see commitment as that recognition, even if the player is number 30 on the panel, even at club level, the fact that they show up every week shows to their teammates, I think, what the team means to them. It means it's, you're part of this group, but you're going to be there. And it's come up a lot in the podcast and even I probably learned through my own playing career, I was kind of happy to be there in a setup, and one of the players told me, she said, don't just be happy to be here. I need you to push me. I need you to, even though I was number 30 and I wouldn't get a jersey, and I would get a jersey that was the wrong jersey, that's how low I was in the panel. I would, she recognised that I needed to be there to push her. And it's that, It's come up so much on the podcast. It's, who's your toughest opponent? Well, it's the girl I'm marking at training every week, because she pushes me to be the best. And that's what Vicky Wall said. It's that number 30 is as valuable in any setup as that number 15 or that number 13 that's starting every week.
And you probably find as well, it's the teams that genuinely believe that, rather than know that that's the right thing to say. That successful ones, for years there, when Jim Gavin and Pat Gilroy were the Dublin football managers, that was the case. Is that their toughest games were on whatever it was, Wednesday or Thursday nights, because they were all in it for the same reason. They're all in it to get each other better. And what is the other side of it, where teams know that they need to say these things? Got the whole kind of change in language now about, we're not going to call them substitutes anymore. Yeah, like it's sometimes it's just lip service. If you don't actually act it, then it's pointless.
Totally. I have a couple of questions in from people. This was an interesting one. Should females train as often as men, for example 3 or 4 times a week at adult club level? They heard years ago that females need more time to recover than men. Myth or bit of truth to that?
Yeah, myth. Jesus, like that's a damaging one as well.
I
It's a
think it's a
dangerous.
real GAA culture one, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's also like when you think about like basic training physiology, why wouldn't they be able to tolerate 3 or 4 times? Because they're not given the opportunity to. You're treating them as fragile or soft if you just go in with that assumption, rather than actually, okay, let's take these well-established training principles that have been around for 150 years and apply them.
Yeah.
Um, we've mentioned a few female athletes there. If you ask Nadia or Hannah Higgs, if they don't train every day of the week, if they don't do something every day of the week, I think they'd be pretty rightly annoyed with that statement.
Yeah.
But like we see it in rehab and in strength and conditioning as well, in that we're told from day one almost in university that females do their ACL more because they're females, that it's this inherent, whether it's a wider pelvis or an increased Q angle or everything. And there's this professor, Sophia Nymphius, and she's gone back to all of these kind of papers and re-looked at all the statistics in them. And what actually comes out is that when you compare males against females, males against males, and females against females, all these 3 separate kind of group comparisons, that the actual difference in who ends up with an ACL tear is the one that's less strong. All right. So it's a case of, yes, in general, females might be less strong than men, but if you give them the opportunity to develop more strength, then they're going to get injured less. And what we know about, obviously, growth in girls is that happens at an earlier age. So you're talking about your 11, 12, 13 peak velocity rather than a little bit later with the boys. How many underage girls teams are being taught proper strength work at that age? 0, and that's where the focus needs to go, is on the earlier age groups in women's sport need to be getting more opportunities to train, particularly on the strength and power and coordination side, rather than it being just as an accepted part of female sport that they're going to get injured more. It's a function of the coaching and the opportunities that they've got. And I think that needs to be pushed more. We're trying to push it more and more in Judes. We're getting a bit more traction with the younger coaches on the athletic development side. And it's going to be really exciting to see what the outcomes are.
Very good. Yeah.
One of my initial interactions with the St.Judes Camogie team was an ACL rehab, and that's common. It's not right, but it's common. And when we look at the actual cold hard data on it, as Sophie did, then we see that it's not because they're female, it's because they're not strong.
That's a really good point.
Look at some of female weightlifters. It's not that they can't be strong, it's just they trained strength and they're now strong. Why can't our 13 or 14-year-old camogie players do the same thing? They don't need to be weightlifters, but they need to be able to tolerate the training.
Brilliant. Just in case the 2 girls are listening, that question wasn't from me. That was from somebody else. I know the 2 girls are friends, but I know they did a track session together. What's it like bringing athletes like that together? And I've interviewed both of them. I think they're a different level of gravy, as I said before. What's it like bringing those 2 type of athletes together?
I think the funniest thing about it, like when you look at it in like performance levels, Hannah's performing at the highest level that she can in camogie. It's an inter-county team. She's the captain of the team. She's playing in Division 1. Like, that's the pinnacle of camogie. And Nadia has represented Ireland at the Olympics. But Hannah still showed up and tried to beat her in some of the runs.
Class. Yeah.
So that's what it gets brought to. And it's a reasonably funny story, because Hannah was late with the traffic going out to Blanchardstown, and while Nadia was warming up, not that she thought that she would lose any of the reps, but she was in another place altogether, because she was now going to have to compete in this session, whereas the previous sessions we'd done over those previous few months, it was very, very kind of technically focused. We were looking at kind of breaking down some running mechanics stuff. Now she was getting ready to race in this warm-up. She wasn't getting ready to do her skill session. And that's what it comes down to.
Love it.
Any opportunity to compete and beat somebody, they'll lap it up, you know.
Brilliant. Another question in about lifting weights. How far out from a match should it be? I know that's a very broad question for such an individual thing, and it's so individualised. Like me and you could have completely different preferences or bodies or anything.
Yeah, you've probably answered it. It depends. We try to use a model of match day -1 or match day -2 or match day -3 on kind of things that you should do. But it depends on what you're doing. You see a lot of the NBA teams lifting on game day because it's such a hectic schedule that they to get it in. So certain environments will dictate that they do it. Really short, sharp power session to warm up for a match. So how the question is probably based around the maximum strength session that we see in these kind of GA programs. You're probably thinking that it has to be as early as possible in the week, as far away from the match as possible.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's like, I'm going to go to maximum on a strength, on a slow maximum type session. If it's a power session, you can probably do it on the Thursday or Friday of a Sunday game. Again, it's about matching up that the volume needs to be low and the stimulus needs to be speed and power, rather than it being strength or hypertrophy or endurance. You know, so it's horses for courses. But you answered it. It depends on where they're at with their training, what their goal is, and what's in the session. Yeah.
Brilliant. I always look at your Instagram. I have a lot of your videos saved. I'm going to try them. I haven't done it yet, but eventually I'm going to go to a pitch and try them. But I heard you say before, boxes are not for jumping on, and step-ups are not just a strength exercise. Can you explain that for me?
Yeah, that kind of I think that came off one of the podcasts I did with Tracy. We were talking about tools for training, and there's one kind of one memory, I suppose, that I go back to when I'm trying to describe this to people. And at the GAIN conference, which is the Fern Gambetta's Athletic Development Conference that I've been to loads of times, Wade Gilbert. Have you come across Wade Gilbert?
Yes, I heard the name.
Yeah, he's got an amazing coaching book. It's called Coaching Better Every Season. It's basically a coaching manual, and he was one of the kind of key speakers at it. And basically, at the end of it, he handed around random stuff. Essentially, some of it was like a witch's hat cone for training. Some of it was like a ball. He handed around a foam roller. He handed around different things. And basically, whatever thing you ended up with, you had to come up with as many different uses for it as you could. All right. So the whole kind of was a boxes just for box jumps and step ups, not just a strength exercise, but looking at what you're doing and seeing how might you tweak it to have a different purpose. You know, and again, it comes into when you're coaching and you only have 12 cones and you only have 4 balls. Like you sit down with that equipment and those tools that you have, and you figure out the vast array of things you can do with them, rather than just saying, oh, well, I've seen this box in the gym before and people always jump on it, so I'm just going to jump on it. It's the same with coaching drills. I've seen people do this drill all the time, so I'm just going to do that. There's no critical thinking into what else you could do. That's where that kind of quote kind of speaks to, is don't just do the same stuff that people have been doing all the time. Is try and explore, get creative. Don't do anything mad, I suppose, but there's definitely different ways to do these things.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask you for a book or podcast recommendation for any of the listeners.
The book recommendations. I don't know, did you see this thing that was going around recently? It was a Bookshare thing.
Oh, the post. Yeah.
And getting a dress and all that kind of stuff. The one that I did, I'm just going to pull it off the. Okay, sir. The one that I recommended was this one. So it's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which sounds like an absolute bore. And it possibly is for some people, but it's all about kind of digging into what your values are. And it's told you this story of this guy going through a lot of kind of psychological stuff as he's motorcycling across the US.
Brilliant.
He's having to repair the bike and all this kind of stuff, and he's treating this thing as a kind of the subtitle on it is an inquiry into values. So he's trying to figure out who he is and what he stands for as he's traveling across these roads. Great story. It gets reasonably dark, so it's not for everybody. Coaching one then is this book called Practice Perfect. Doug Lemov, he actually wrote an actual sports coaching book as well, but this is the book that he wrote initially, which is for teachers. And it's basically each chapter is a accepted teaching rule, and it's kind of revolutionized how I layer kind of sessions in a week, or how we look at the construct of a session is how people actually learn things.
Yeah.
From an education point of view, and then trying to apply it to sports coaching. It's really same for rehab, same for coordination work, but I learned a lot about sports coach sessions out of it.
Very good. I like the way you say practice perfect, because one of my gripes as a coach is when a player says practice makes perfect. I'm like, no. Perfect practice makes perfect, because they could be practicing all day, but it's the wrong technique. It's the wrong kick or solo. And it just drives me up the wall. I don't know where, and that actually came from a basketball coach. Would have been Jerome Westbrooks. He would have been well known in the basketball communities, but he said perfect practice makes perfect, not that throwaway saying. Because as you say, 10,000 hours, if you're practicing wrong for 10,000 hours, you're going to have some weird looking strike or some weird looking kick.
A better one for you. It's a Vern Gambetta one as well, as practice makes permanent.
Oh, I've heard that before. Yeah. That's actually better than perfect.
Whatever you're doing, you'll continue to do.
Exactly. Yeah. I haven't included this in the question list. I like to kind of put someone on the spot for this one. I've interviewed a number of your athletes. I've kind of mentioned their names before. But what coach should I get on the podcast? And I've interviewed Adrian. Obviously, Ray is on the list, so I'm looking for somebody different. And Paul's on the list as well.
Okay, so Ray and Paul definitely. On top of that, Irish coach, is it?
Whatever you think.
Well, probably, I suppose he's probably in high demand at the moment. Paul Kinnerk, he's the Limerick hurling coach. I seem to find the best balance on how we bring this constraints-led approach, the actual academics of coaching skill and coaching performance, and bring it into a high performance setting. Some of his talks are on YouTube and everything. They're just so interesting, but I'd love to hear him talk about some of these kind of specific questions. The other one probably would have been Kleena, to be honest.
Yeah, that's coming out soon. That's really good.
Yeah, Kleena is this coach that we've kind of almost worked together 3 or 4 times. I'm at some point it'll happen, but she's like an amazing CV. Is a really great person. I've met her on a few times. We've done this kind of like shared learning thing with Dublin hurling at one point, with Matty and Kleena and Mossy, the physio, and you just know that she's a sort of player, or she's a sort of coach that players will have no problem buying into, like she did a little bit of work with Dublin Camogie at one point, and it's always the one that comes back is like, they'd love to get Kleena involved again.
Kleena was my strength and conditioning coach for a number of years, so we had a good bit of slagging was during that episode, but she was deadly. Like I can definitely second that. I'm going to move on to Sideline 7. This episode is so long, probably longer than you bargained for. But the first question is, what is your favourite quote?
My favourite quote at the moment, I was a sucker for quotes all my life. It's not even a real quote. It's a fake quote from a Guinness ad. It's a Moby Dick quote, but it's not actually in the book. It's Ahab says, "I don't care who you are. Here's to your dream."
Okay, I have never had a Guinness quote on before, so that's a first for the podcast.
The best advertisement you'll ever see is the surfer, the Guinness surfer ad. You'll watch it and you'll watch it 100 times.
Brilliant. I'll add it to the list. Question 2, what's the best sporting event you've been to? And you can pick one as a coach or one as a fan or just whatever, or even a player.
I kind of spoke a little bit about playing hurling with Galway at one point. I grew up absolutely idolising Joe Canning. So he would win I think he's maybe 3 or 4 years older than me. And when I was coming through at like under 12, under 14 level, like we heard about Joe Canning when we were about 12 years old, when he was like 15, 16. Like everybody in Galway knew who this guy was. And it was before YouTube or before any of these kind of stuff. So you never really saw them that much. And then I suppose when I did, which was, I think the first time I actually saw him play, it was in a All-Ireland minor final in 2005. But became this kind of like, that's kind of the sporting hero there.
Okay.
And then getting to, I'm going to say train with him, because I never actually got any minutes on the field that season. I got to train with him for a whole year as a teammate, and that was incredible. So it's not quite a sporting event; it's a sporting experience. But to see the Joe show up close and personal for a full year was, I'll never forget it.
What's he like in training? Is obviously everyone says, we've mentioned Dermot Connolly a couple of times. Like obviously they're amazing talents, but there's a reason why they've got to that level. What is he like at training?
It was 10 years ago now. Memories are, even though I said I'll never forget it, the actual specifics are fading.
Okay.
But it was just consistently doing things at a high level. It wasn't the sort of player that I'll show up and I'll train hard on Thursday, but I'll take it handy on the Tuesday. He was the fella that was hitting you the hardest, who was executing the skills the best, and who was obviously quite a vocal leader as well. Became the captain of that team not too long after that.
Brilliant. What's been the biggest setback or challenge so far in your career, and how did you react to it?
One of the problems with physio is that the evidence, research evidence around what works and what doesn't is very, very fraught with gaps. And one thing that would have been accepted as a treatment methodology is disproven within a couple of years. So it's trying to deal with that. So we have a certain approach in RTP, myself and Thomas, that we've developed through different experiences and different learning opportunities. And we see it working on a day-to-day basis. But then we'll get sent a research paper, or we'll come across a research paper that might say that it's not the best thing to do. And that's really hard, because you're building a career and building a business and building a methodology around something that you see working all the time. But the way it's constructed in this research paper is showing that maybe the effect isn't what we think it might be. And like, it's a real Dunning-Kruger type thing. You feel like an absolute sham whenever you see these things. So what we tend to do is we reach out to the same people. Maybe it's a bit of an echo chamber, I don't know. We reach out to our mentors and we talk about it and we discuss it and we make sense of it, and we do change our approach when we see things that are glaring. But for the most part, when we look at it in the cold light of day, we have a duty of care to our patients to get them better primarily. And our secondary duty is to try and follow an evidence base as much as it exists, but no more than in coaching science. It was great coaches, like you got John Wooden was coaching and creating unstoppable teams before people heard about constraints-led approach, skill acquisition stuff, So sometimes what's happening on the ground is ahead of the research. And that sometimes sounds like a really egotistical thing to say, but I'm held accountable day to day from if somebody's getting better or not. And if they are getting better, that's experience-based evidence as well, and I can't discount that, because the research studies will be constructed to be as black and white as possible, and every rehab case is grey. So it's trying to get the kind of the balance on it.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pull on my own experience here in terms of setback, or probably more of a challenge, particularly with the podcast, particularly with coaching. Only up till 2 weeks ago, probably would have, with the coaching side of things, probably would have had this really inhibiting, crippling sort of imposter syndrome. And I get it a lot with the podcast, even though I've 90 episodes recorded at this rate. How do you deal with that? And someone told me, that'll never go away. It just kind of develops over time and comes in waves. But how do you deal with imposter syndrome?
I suppose it's going back to, like we talked about first principles earlier. Have a strong set of principles that you believe in, all right, that you can fall back on, when you do get your confidence knocked. But it's having a support network of coaches or physios or whatever the case may be that have been there and done that and have dealt with all that stuff for the odd bit. I have a group of maybe 3 people that I'll reach out to. One of them's a physio, one of them is athletic development, one of them's a coach. And it's just a case of, look, here's what I'm going through at the moment. And they'll give their 2 cents on it, and it might make me feel a little bit better about it, Guiding light, that's all it is.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of on the flip side then, what's been your biggest achievement on or off the pitch?
It's probably the 2020 Dublin Camogie Championship, because the 2019 Dublin Camogie Championship, we got absolutely annihilated in the final. Like, not even beaten. We were, and the girls have used the word before, we were humiliated. So we spent a whole year training for the following year's final, to play that team a certain way, and obviously to turn the result around. So it was a year's worth of work being executed perfectly by the team, and that was so satisfying. I mean, it could have been very risky. We might not have made it to the final by focusing on how we're going to play against a certain team.
Yeah.
But we knew that there was such a gap there that we needed to fill, that we needed to work on it all the time. And obviously the weeks of games and we're coming up against a certain opposition, we'd have little tweaks to it, but it was identifying what went wrong, working away on it, and then beating them in 2020.
Brilliant. Looking back, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Peter asked this as well, and I said it's just sport. Yeah, don't get carried away with it. Yeah, it's just sport.
Exactly. It's something I have to remind myself about a lot, particularly when coaching. Who would be your dream dinner guest and why, dead or alive? And you can open up the table to a couple of people.
Okay, so the one I had thought about was I'd never met my dad's parents, and that was one thing that anytime anybody asks that kind of stuff, is like, I think you should know somewhat about your grandparents, and I don't know that much about them, Who else? I've been talking to Ray about sitting down for dinner for quite a while.
I met him for a coffee recently. It was very eye-opening, I have to say. Ray, in case you're listening.
Yeah, even if it's just for a few beers, Ray, please answer your phone. Anytime I talk to him, it's great. I get a great come away with loads of stuff out of it. Yeah, you put me on the spot there now. I think they're always the classic ones of your sporting icons. So like, I think I'd love to hear what Michael Jordan has to say. I think that God, I can't even think of the name of it now. That Last Dance documentary was, I suppose, kind of like sitting down for dinner. An interesting story actually, that Vern Gambetta that I've mentioned a few times was the head of athletic development at the Chicago White Sox when Michael Jordan joined them. He's like coached them. And he said he's one abiding memory where he had the flattest feet he's ever seen in his life. Not many people have seen Michael Jordan's feet, and he has. That's his story. Yeah.
That's the secret to it, I think.
So it just tells you that perfect arches aren't the key to high performance, are they?
Yeah. And do you know what? I think his Jordan's plan worked out. Do you know when he announced that Last Dance, when he said yes to it, because they were sitting on that footage for 20 years, the day LeBron won the championship. So I think his idea paid off. He's definitely he's brought back the conversation of he is the GOAT. Yeah. So that's
classic case. I took that one personally.
Yeah, exactly. Final question before I let you go. We're an hour and 45 minutes into this, but it was amazing. If your life was a book, what chapter would this be called?
You sent me these questions during the week, and I spent at least 2 hours, I'd say, trying to think about this one. I suppose where I'm at the moment is, particularly this year, there's been a lot of kind of things we've worked on over the last couple of years, whether it's in business or myself and Aoife, like getting engaged, planning the wedding. It's all happening kind of this year now. The business opened last year, we're a year in business, all this kind of stuff. We got our house, a lot of really, really great stuff happened at the end of last year. And I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. There's one chapter in the Lord of the Rings where Merry and Pippin are sitting in Isengard. They're after overthrowing. This is the nerdy one. They're after overthrowing Saruman, and they're sitting back, eating and drinking and smoking. basking in their success. And the chapter is called Flotsam and Jetsam, and that's what this chapter is about right now.
So for anyone who hasn't read Lord of the Rings, it's going to be sitting back, eating, smoking, drinking.
Asking what they've just done.
Yeah, exactly. Donie, look, I learned so much of it. List of notes here beside me. I absolutely loved this conversation. For anyone listening, where's the best place to find you in terms of getting in contact or looking at some of your videos and stuff?
I suppose Instagram is the most convenient one. It's how we tend to communicate, me and you.
Yeah.
So that's probably the most convenient one. That's at Donie Fox. Anybody who wants to see the clinic, wants to come in for some of the services, like whether it's physio, whether it's performance, whether it's whatever, our website is rtp.physio. And you can obviously book online. That's another shameless plug. But if you want to work together, essentially that's where you'll find me.
Brilliant. Right. I'll be sure to leave everything in the description box below. And thanks a million again.
Yeah, thanks a million, Orla. Cheers.
A big thank you to Donie for joining me on the podcast today. I thoroughly enjoyed our chat and I personally took a lot away from it. If you did enjoy the episode and you want to get in touch, I'll be sure to leave all of his social media links in the description box below. If you are enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as it does help the show grow. A big thank you to Chin Up Goggles for sponsoring the coaching series, and thank you for listening.